Hello and welcome to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life. Talking about tonight's slate of action. So we got 10 games on tap. We got a Coors Field game. Once again, we've got some good names on the mound, but nobody in a terrific spot. You get Dallas Keuchel probably in the best spot, but it's also a Tampa Bay team that's been really hot recently, especially against left-handed pitching. Obviously a park upgrade for them as well. Corey Kluber is your best pitcher that's on the mound today. But at Fenway, certainly still a guy that you're looking at because he's obviously the most talented of any of these pitchers. But a tough environment for him there against the Boston team that's been putting up some big numbers over the past week or so. So what way are you looking? If you're paying up here for one, maybe you're paying up for more than one pitcher. Who do you like the best here?
I'm having a hard time deciding kind of still. I like a lot of these guys a decent amount. I think Kluber is probably the way I would go still. I mean, I'm just not I'm not scared of Boston. I mean, they've been good, but he's the best pitcher on the board to me today.
Yep.
And that's what it's going to come down to, I think. I mean, Keuchel's in a good spot, but Tampa Bay has been really good against lefties. Keuchel hasn't been amazing. I think it's between those two for me, probably. I have a hard time choosing between them. The other guy that I guess I would toss in there is probably Jamie Garcia against San Francisco. He's a little overpriced on DraftKings for me, which makes it a little bit tough, but I think he's probably my third guy that I would throw in that trio. But I think right now I have him Kluber, Keuchel, Garcia.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. I mean, especially considering that Kluber's cheaper on DraftKings than Keuchel. Definitely helps a little bit. I'm with you that Garcia's a little bit overpriced, but obviously San Francisco better against righties than they are against lefties. And then you get a couple other really good pitchers that are all in not very ideal situations. John Lester dealing with even worse win than they had yesterday at Wrigley. Obviously weather concerns there. And Detroit team that's finally healthy. Obviously adding Miguel Cabrera back in there takes away quite a bit of his upside. And then you got Steven Strasburg at Coors. You got Noah Syndergaard at Camden, where he certainly has big-time strikeout upside there, but we've seen Sonny Gray struggle there, and then yesterday we saw Jacob deGrom. He was fine, but didn't really have the strikeout upside we kind of have come to expect when you're facing this Baltimore team. So Syndergaard is one of my favorite, probably my favorite overall tournament option if I'm paying up, because you do like the upside there in that matchup.
Yeah, I definitely think Syndergaard's probably my favorite GPP play after those top two guys we talked about. Garcia is more of that cash game play to me. I'm probably going to use him quite a bit in cash games, even though I do think he's a little bit overpriced. But I'll probably keep his ownership percentage down in GPPs too, which is nice. I just don't know how much upside he has. I mean, he's been great over his last couple games, though. I think he's gone 15 straight scoreless innings. He's only given up one run in his last 3 starts. He's not striking out a ton of guys, but he's averaging 5 over each of the last 3. And he's gone deep in the last 2, going 7 against Milwaukee at Milwaukee, scoreless, and then 8 1/3 against Miami at home, scoreless. So there's a lot to like there. He's looked great. So, I mean, that's the guy I'm probably going to look at the most for cash games if I'm not spending on either Keuchel or Kluber, which is a little bit riskier to me. But Kluber is definitely my favorite. When you go below that is where I start to have a lot of problems. I mean, you can look at Ubaldo Jimenez against the Mets is kind of an interesting play. Obviously, the Mets are striking out a ton right now. I think they're leading the majors in strikeouts since they acquired Cespedes. So there's definitely some upside there. We know Jimenez has been up and down. He looked pretty good the last time out in the first couple innings and then kind of lost it a little bit in the middle of the game there. I think his price is going to have him as one of my favorites today. The other guy I like price-wise is Samardzija at 6,800.
Yeah. I mean, Samardzija is a guy who hasn't been particularly good, but we know he's a much better pitcher than what he's been recently. And it's not like the Angels are exactly tearing the cover off the ball right now either. So certainly, I mean, this is a guy that was a 9K pitcher earlier in the season before he started struggling. So definitely the potential's there. A couple other guys I'm considering. Nate Karns is a guy who. He's not a great pitcher, but he's a guy who usually gives you a quality start. He'll usually give you 5-6 innings, 2 to 3 earned runs. Doesn't strike out a ton of guys, but does have a 7 strikeout and an 8 strikeout game in his last 3. This is a Houston team that strikes out a lot, so I don't think he's a bad secondary option. But like you said, once you're looking down these cheap guys, I mean, it's bad. You want to be targeting most of these other guys rather than playing them. And I guess the only guy that's cheap that I'll consider, I'll go back to Robbie Ray again because the Pirates do strike out a lot against left-handed pitching. They have some individuals that hit lefties well, but Robbie Ray still has pretty good stuff for a pitcher at 6,600 in a big pitcher's park.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anyone else. Mark Burley, I guess, if you're looking for a really low upside cash game play against Philly. I mean, Philly hasn't been good against lefties. They've cooled off a ton again lately. He's, I believe, the biggest favorite on the board at minus 210, right up there with Lester. So, I mean, he feels like kind of a safe cash game play. I just have a really hard time playing Burley when his strikeout upside is like max 5.
Yeah,
and
if that.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's really tough. So, I mean, I don't want to pay 7,300 for him, even in cash games. Like, he feels like a fairly safe win here with Adam Morgan on the mound against the Blue Jays offense. So you can kind of bank on that. But, I mean, outside of that, I just don't see where his points are coming from. He's going to give up hits. There's just not a lot to love there.
Yeah, I mean, even when he pitches deep into games, he just doesn't do a whole lot because he's a contact pitcher, definitely. So, yeah, I'm with you there. None of these other guys I'm willing to target. As we look at catcher, I'm really not playing Kyle Schwarber tonight. Been terrible against left-handed hitters, or left-handed pitchers, I should say. 43% strikeout rate. Obviously, he has the upside, and there should be a lot of offense scored in this game. So you consider him in tournaments, I guess. But for me, I'd rather save my money and go with some other guys like Russell Martin at $3,600 against Adam Morgan. Been struggling over the past week or so, but we know this offense, as always, against the lefty, and not a bad park factor here, Citizens Bank. So he's the guy I'm looking to more often than not. Another interesting guy, if he's in the lineup tonight, wasn't yesterday, but Yan Gomes, better against lefties than righties, but Joe Kelly, terrible against righties. So I think Yan Gomes has some big-time upside here as well at Fenway.
Yeah, I think you nailed most of the guys I'm looking at. A lot of these other guys are kind of tough. I mean, Wilson Ramos, I expect to be a pretty popular play against the lefty in Coors today, even though he's going to be probably hitting 7th or 8th at best. Minimum guys, Oscar Hernandez for Arizona. If he's in the lineup in the 6th or 7th hole against the lefty and Happ, he's flat 2,000. I think he's a fine play as far as cheap guys go at flat minimum because there's not a lot else at catcher today that I like for a really low price. So, yeah. I mean, he's just, and if he's in the lineup guy, you can consider. After that, I mean, everyone else kind of jumps up in price a little bit, and I'd rather pay for one of the guys you mentioned.
Yeah, I agree. A couple middle kind of guys I'll consider. I like Wellington Castillo against the lefty anytime. You don't like the park factors, but J.A. Happ been pretty generous to righties. And then Jonah Navarro at 2,900 if he's in the lineup. He's a nice cheap way to get some Blue Jays exposure. Looking over at first base here, you get Paul Goldschmidt against the lefty. It is at PNC Park, so not an ideal park factor for him. But the guys that I'm looking at most, Joey Votto against Jeremy Guthrie, who may just be the actual worst pitcher in all of baseball against lefties. And then Miguel Cabrera at Wrigley Field against a pitcher in John Lester, who he's owned throughout his career. Wind blowing out, big total there. It's going to be really hard for me not to play one of these two guys in most of my games. Yeah,
it's going to be very, very hard. I mean, there's a ton of good first base options, though. Edwin Encarnacion against Morgan and in Philly is pretty solid at 4,400. Encarnacion looked good last night. Goldschmidt at 5,400 might be my favorite GPP play against Happ. There was a couple other guys that even looked pretty decent. Jose Abreu against Jared Weaver at 4,100 is an awesome GPP play. And then, I mean, Ryan Zimmerman at 4,300 against a lefty in Colorado is pretty hard to ignore, too. So, I mean, there's going to be a ton of diversity at first base today.
Yeah, and even Albert Pujols, who's got great numbers against Samardzija, 7 for 19 with 3 bombs. So, a lot of your BVP specials, your BVP truthers are going to come out today in the first base. So, other guys, I mean, I still like Victor Martinez. It's a good lefty in Leicester, but like I mentioned, significant winds blowing out. We saw Anthony Gose get into one and hit a home run last night. So, I mean, it's not going to take a lot tonight. And at 3,600, we know the kind of upside that he provides against the lefties. So, John Lester, generally in a non-win situation here, I'd be all about in GPPs, but there's no way I'm touching either of these guys tonight. One more interesting option. I'm not trying to pick on Corey Kluber, but Travis Shaw, first base, third base eligibility, 3,500, has been mashing the ball since he came up. He's got 9 hits in his last 3 games. One of them a homer, a double. So, I mean, certainly not an ideal situation, but a guy who's a good hitter who you can get at certainly a really low ownership tonight.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, moving on here to second base. we've got plenty of options here, of course. One guy fresh off the DL, pinch hit last night, Jason Kipnis. You love his matchup with Joe Kelly. You don't like the $5,100 price tag, especially fresh off an injury, but certainly got to consider. Anthony Rendon is a guy who's been horrible, but he's in Coors Field against a lefty, crushed lefties throughout his career, isn't crushing anyone but himself right now. So, you got to make your decision there. I don't really like the price tag with him either, so not a guy I'm going out of my way to play. I think I'd rather play his teammate Denny Espinosa at 3,400 because he's actually hitting the ball. A couple doubles last night. He's not an everyday starter anymore, though, so make sure he's in the lineup. But if not him, I think Colton Wong's the guy that I'm going to be looking for in the cheaper range at 3,400 against Matt Cain. And Matt Cain's getting smashed by lefties so far this year.
Yeah, definitely. I like all those options. I'm probably going to play Anthony Rendon for like the 15th straight day, so eventually he'll have a nice game for me.
Yeah. He's due.
The other guy that I like quite a bit is another guy that I play all the time, Ben Zobrist, with second base outfield eligibility, hitting second in the order against Samson today in Cincinnati. He's a great home run park factor for guys from the left side of the plate. Zobrist is probably my favorite GPP play for sure at second base.
Yeah, he took a roll as Chapman deep last night. So,
yep.
If he's hitting Chapman, he's definitely hitting anybody else. So, I'm with you there. Another cheap guy, especially if he's batting second in the order again like he did last night against the lefty, Aaron Hill, $2,600. Yep. One of those guys you love to hate where he's just not a particularly great hitter, but has been hitting lefties well recently, and that cheap price tag at $2,600 against J.A. Happ is one that I'll be trying to take advantage of so I can get some other big bats in my lineup.
Yeah, and then the last guy I'll mention with second base shortstop eligibility, Cesar Hernandez again, only 3,100, hitting leadoff against Burley. That should be a pretty good spot too.
Yeah, definitely like that. Third base options, Josh Donaldson. If you paid up for him anywhere last night, you were definitely rewarded with 2 homers, 4 RBI. We know what he can do. He gets a lefty tonight. You got to pay a lot for him once again at $5,900, but he's definitely a guy I'll be targeting in GPPs. As always, I don't care what his price is. I'll get myself some exposure every night because the guy is just incredible right now. Nolan Arenado gets Strasburg at home at Coors Field. Obviously, Strasburg, good pitcher, but not a guy you have any faith in at Coors Field, of course. Once again, you can play Miguel Cabrera at third base, but the guy I think I probably like the most, if I'm not playing Mickey at third, is going to be Chris Bryant at $4,700. Yep. At home against the lefty. Wind blown out, you do the math here. He should be a popular play tonight, and he's a guy I'll have a ton of.
Yeah, definitely. That's probably my favorite play there also. Aramis Ramirez against the lefty at 3,900 is okay. Hitting cleanup for the Pirates. I'll mention Lonnie Chisenhall for you again because I like him again today. He had a home run last night. He's reached base in, I think, 8 straight games he's played in now, so he's a pretty interesting cash game play for me. At
paving his way to the Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah. Right into the Value Play Hall of Fame.
Yeah, the Value Play Hall of Fame. Well said. I like how you put that.
Yeah, I like him quite a bit at 3,300. I think I'm going to end up using him a lot in cash games if I can't afford Donaldson or Bryant because I like Rendon more at second base. I don't really want to play him at third. So he's probably going to be a guy that fits in at third base for 3,300 for me quite a bit.
Yeah, and another guy who's been hitting really well, and he's been hitting second when he's been in the lineup the last 2 starts, Marwin Gonzalez at 2,700. Yep. Nate Carnes has been a good pitcher, but not a great pitcher, not an overpowering guy by any means. So third base shortstop eligibility, he's probably my favorite cheap option. And I guess you could throw Jose Iglesias in there. He's hit lefties fairly well. Obviously, the whole Wrigley Field thing tonight. But I think if those two are both in similar spots, I'll take Marwin Gonzalez instead.
Yeah, I will too. Gonzalez looked really good last night. That's one of my favorite plays today. I like taking value at shortstop too. Yep. There's a couple of guys you can play today at shortstop that are pretty valuable. Eugenio Suarez has been hitting second for the Reds lately. I like him a decent amount against Guthrie. He's not quite as cheap as I'd like him to be at 3,700 on DraftKings, but I like that spot right now in the Royals order with the middle of their order hitting really well. We mentioned Cesar Hernandez already at 3,100. I don't really love the matchup with Keuchel, but Tim Beckham's only 2,600 again. He's probably going to hit second because it's a lefty. He's done that against the lefties the last 3 times they've faced them. And Tampa Bay's been, like we mentioned earlier when we were talking about Keuchel, just fantastic against lefties. So if they're scoring runs, he should be in a really good shape at second in the order for 2,600. The guy I actually kind of like a little bit in GPPs that's expensive is Jose Reyes at 4,400 against Strasburg because Strasburg doesn't hold guys on well. Reyes hasn't been fantastic, but I mean, 4,400 in cores. I have a hard time arguing with that in GPPs against a guy he can easily steal bases against. I mean, we saw him do a lot of things last night. He had a home run last night with a double and two singles, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a massive game, and that was without stolen bases. So I think he's in a really good spot again tonight.
Yeah. I mean, he finally had that big game we've been waiting for. I think it was
Yep.
you and I that were talking about it yesterday. Like, it was coming eventually, and last night was the night. A couple other guys here in Coors Field you can consider. I prefer Ian Desmond to Yunel Escobar. I don't expect Escobar to have another game like that, maybe ever in his life. I mean, that was one of the best games he's ever had. But Ian Desmond had a great game as well. He gets a lefty. We know the kind of power that he has. And then one more guy I like, Jung Ho Kang at $3,600 against a lefty. He's another guy who homered again last night. He's got a ton of power and just always seems to be really, really low owned as well.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Correa in general and GPPs too, although I do prefer Reyes a little bit just because of the ownership percentage. I mean, it's hard to not mention Tulo here against Morgan too, although at 4,600 he just hasn't been very good lately. You got to think he keeps coming around at some point, but we've been saying that all season, but he also hasn't been bad all season.
Yeah, he just hasn't been Tulowitzki good.
Yeah, I mean,
if he had a different jersey on, he'd be pretty good.
Yeah, he's reached base in 6 straight games again. He's scored in 4 of the last 5. I mean, he's playing well. He's just not playing up to the most expensive shortstop on the board most nights well.
Yeah, exactly. Outfield options, of course, you can consider Bryce Harper. Last night, 0 hits, but he walked 4 times and scored every time. So who knows if maybe that's the strategy. Just go ahead and pitch around him. It's a lefty-lefty matchup anyway, though, which is probably why he's only $6,000 tonight instead of $64,000 from last night. Jose Bautista, $5,500 against the lefty. Struggled last night, 0 for 5, but obviously Adam Morgan just not a guy that you're trying to shy away from. I think Michael Brantley will probably have a pretty low ownership due to his $5,300 price tag, but love him against Joe Kelly. Brantley's been one of the better hitters in baseball over the past couple weeks, so certainly like him. And then another pricey guy that I like a lot, and people will certainly be off him, especially because you see a name Mike Trout right behind him, but Dexter Fowler, guy that can do it all, and I love the Cubs and Tigers bats again tonight. So $4,800, probably going to have lower ownership than I think he should tonight.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough in the outfield tonight with all these expensive plays. Another guy that I love tonight is McCutchen against Robbie Ray. Yep. Starling Marte, too, both of them against lefties. Over 370 WOBA, both displaying a decent amount of power. Actually, Marte's got a much higher ISO this year at 243, but I still think McCutchen's going to close that gap at some point with a hot streak here. So I like both of them quite a bit. You already mentioned Kong. A lot of the Pittsburgh righties are in play today, and we've mentioned Gregory Polanco enough times that at 3,800, I think even against a lefty, he's a pretty solid cash game play at the top of the lineup with those guys hitting behind him. Another mid-range play like that, Chris Cobaello, if you're not playing some of the other Blue Jays or if you're stacking them, he's really interesting at 3,600, hitting 5th in the lineup most of the time right now against lefties.
Yeah, I like that definitely a lot, too. He always seems to be like the cheap exposure to the Blue Jays when he can't afford the big ones. JD Martinez at 4,400, another power bat. Hasn't actually been great against lefties this year, but we like him. One guy who's been absolutely horrible over the past few weeks, Jay Bruce, $4,000, but he's a lefty against Jeremy Guthrie who has power and a good ballpark, so you're considering him for your tournaments, of course, just for those reasons there. A couple other guys to consider here as you're looking at the middle range. Yasmani Tomas has been hitting lefties pretty well. He gets J.A. Happ. He should be batting 5th tonight. Arizona just continues to do damage against good pitchers. And, this is not a particularly good pitcher here. So definitely, I think, a very good spot for them. And then looking down even cheaper, Jason Worth's still $3,300. You don't love him, but he, throughout his career, hits lefties hard. Had 16 DraftKings points last night. So $3,300, probably the best cheap piece you can get of Coors Field tonight.
Yeah, I mean, especially if he's hitting leadoff again, it's really hard not to play him at that price. If you're looking for some really cheap guys, Chris Denorfia has been hitting 2nd for the Cubs against lefties lately. He's 2,200. We mentioned how much we like that game at Wrigley today. Darren Roof against Mark Burley. He's got a 450 WOBA against lefties on the season. It's a pretty small sample size for him, but at 2,200, I think you can do a lot worse than him against Burley. Justin Maxwell, we've mentioned him before, is a decent power guy against lefties. Garcia has been really good lately, but Maxwell hitting sixth probably for 2,300, I think is an interesting play. And then I
Maxwell's
had
hitting
one.
well too so far.
Yeah, he is. That's a good point. David Murphy is the other guy I would look at a little bit against Samardzija. We mentioned Samardzija's been struggling. Murphy's been pretty good against righties all season. He's hitting fifth in the lineup for the Angels right now, so I think he's in a pretty good spot there too, hitting right after the middle of their order.
Yeah, I like that. And then one more guy to mention here, Rajai Davis hasn't been great recently, but $3,400. He's got some power and speed, and we know John Lester's still seemingly incapable of holding runners on. So if Rajai Davis gets on, he's going to run at will tonight, you would imagine. All right, and that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out all of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.